Hi, my name is Bob Wheeler, and welcome to the Berean Observer, where we search the scriptures daily to see whether or not these things are true. Well, today we want to explore what has come to be kind of a controversial topic, and that is the question, is America a Christian nation? And it might surprise you to hear me say that, strictly speaking, the answer is no. There is no such thing as a Christian nation. Okay, God views the entire human race as in a fallen and sinful condition. And Jesus is very, very clear and explicit on this. Unless a man is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of heaven. Okay? And that is not true of most Americans. And it never has been, except for maybe the very early, like Plymouth Colony, in the very beginning of 1620. But since then, the average American is an unsaved person, and he's pursuing his own self-interest, and he's not really paying any attention to what God wants. Now, but you might ask, but aren't most Americans decent, law-abiding citizens? Some even attend church regularly. I was kind of startled to see some statistics about the Southern Baptist Convention. And even though we think of Southern Baptists as very conservative, Bible-believing Christians, only 1 out of 3 Southern Baptists apparently attends church on a regular basis. Their membership roll is 3 times the size of their typical Sunday attendance. And if that's true of the Southern Baptist Convention, what are you going to say about the country as a whole? And so that raises the question, what makes someone a Christian? What exactly does it mean to be a Christian? Okay? And how does God view this situation? Does God think that this is this righteous, Christian country that we live in? And so you have to come down to basically what exactly is the essence of Christian morality. Okay? So you go to Matthew chapter 22, and there's a famous passage here where a Jewish lawyer asked Jesus a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and prophets." Now think about it for a minute. What Jesus is saying is that the first and the greatest commandment is that we should love the Lord our God with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our might. And how true is that even of many professing Christians, let alone the people that are just out there on the street, you see. How many people actually show up for a church service on a Sunday morning? How many of them are out playing golf or washing their car or whatever, you see? And even those that show up for church, how many of them are consciously entering into the presence of God and lifting up their voices in praise to Him because they genuinely love Him and appreciate all that He's done in their hearts, you see? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we'd have to say that at best we have a mere formal outward appearance of Christianity, and at worst we just totally ignore God altogether and just leave Him out of our lives. And then he says that the second greatest commandment is that you should love the Lord, you should love your neighbor as yourself, which means that we ought to be thinking about in terms of our fellow human beings and they're responding to their needs and thinking about what's good for them. Now let's take a closer look at this here. We go back to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, and I'm reading here from the New King James Version. And in Matthew 25, Jesus kind of elaborates a little bit more on what we're actually in the 10 Commandments. So, for example, in chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, okay, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment.' But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, 'Raka,' shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your guilt. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and you become thrown down in prison." So in other words, what Jesus is doing, you might say at first, wait a minute, how can God think that you're a murderer just because you lost your temper at somebody? But the thing about it is this. What God is doing is He's looking on the heart. He's looking at the inward feelings and emotions. Okay, so just because you didn't actually physically murder somebody because you don't want to spend the rest of your life behind bars, okay, doesn't mean that the desire wasn't there inside the heart. And God's looking at the desire. The fact that you would feel that way about the other person, that you almost have the desire to want to kill him, is a good example of that. I know when I was in the Army, of course, I heard a lot of foul language, and after a while you kind of get used to it, sort of. But the one word that used to really, really disturb me right down to the very end is the F word. And the reason why is because when people would say that, they're just simply expressing their uttermost contempt and dislike and hatred for the person that they're doing it. It's probably the crudest, most vulgar way to just try to dismiss somebody as you possibly can. And so you figure, what is the attitude behind that? What causes that? And how does God view that in His heart if He said that the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself? Is that loving your neighbor? Of course not. Obviously not. And then Jesus goes on in verses 27 to 30. And He says, "You have heard that it was said to of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right hand causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your eyes members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell." Now, some people will try to argue, but that's just a natural human feeling. You see, that's normal. Why would why would you be guilty of sin just because you're sexually attracted to somebody? And the answer again is because God's looking on the inward heart. You see, and what He expects is that marriage is supposed to be a committed, binding union between one man and one woman, and you're to be faithful to your spouse. And so for you to sit there at a YouTube channel and look at all this pornography, and and you're lusting after some woman that you never met before, have no idea, have absolutely no relationship with her at all, you're just turned down by all her gorgeous curves, that is basically lust, which means that basically you have that self-centered desire for sexual pleasure regardless of any kind of outward commitment. And in the sight of God, that's as good as committing adultery. You committed adultery in your heart, even though you may not have actually physically touched the other person, you see. And so that's why it is that Jesus said that that's a violation of the seventh commandment. So again, the underlying problem is in the heart. So, for example, over in Matthew chapter 15, Matthew chapter 15, and verses 11 through 20, starting with verse 10, "When He had called the multitude to Himself, He said to them, Hear and understand, not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what cometh out of the mouth, this defiles his man." And then His disciples were kind of puzzled by that, and He went on to explain. So He says, "Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man." So in other words, the Jews of His day were thinking in terms of the external ceremonial law, all these dietary laws that they had to observe. And Jesus is saying, what really defiles a man is what's going on inside of his heart. And notice what He says is inside the heart there. He says the evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, and blasphemies. We've probably all had the experience of desiring or fantasizing about at least some of these things, and that's the thing that God sees. Okay, human society judges us by our outward actions. God looks on the heart, and He looks at the inward motive. And sometimes we'll find ourselves in a situation where we'll do the right thing outwardly for the wrong reasons inwardly. We're just doing it for the applause of men. We're looking for admiration of our fellow human beings. We're basically being lifted up with pride. instead of having a real genuine love for God with our whole heart and a genuine love and concern for our fellow neighbor. Let's take a look at a concrete example to kind of illustrate the whole point. Let's take a look at American society, and in particular, the American economic system. All right? There's a famous treatise on this nature of capitalism. It was written by Adam Smith, entitled The Wealth of Nations. And in there, he advanced the idea of the famous idea of the invisible hand. Okay, so what is that and how does that work? Well, here's what he said. Every individual is continually exerting himself to find out the most advantageous employment for whatever capital he can command. It is his own advantage, indeed, and not that of society, which he has in view. But the study of his own advantage naturally, or rather necessarily, leads him to prefer that employment which is most advantageous to society. In other words, what he's saying is that human beings are motivated by self-interest, and so if they're you might call it like enlightened self-interest, and they realize, well, it's to their advantage to be able to cooperate with other human beings and to do things. So they wind up, presumably, in actual practice, they wind up advancing what is good for the common good. But they're doing it for entirely selfish motives and reasons. And then he goes on 2 pages later here, so I can get it apart. He says, he generally, indeed, neither intends to promote the public interest, nor how much he is promoting it, but preferring the support of domestic to that of foreign industry, he intends only to his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as to produce may be of the greatest value, he intends not only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote the end which has no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for the society that it has no part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectively than when he really intends to promote it. I have never known much good done by those who affected to trade for a public good. It is an affectation indeed, and not very common among merchants, and very few words need to be employed in dissuading them from it. So that's Adam Smith. He tries to argue that even though you might have a capitalist society, a capitalist economic system, where everybody's pursuing their own economic self-interest, they're still doing it for selfish motives. But what the Bible says in 1 Timothy chapter 6, in verses 9 and 10 is, but those who desire to fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So, in other words, it's basically even though they might, if you could argue on a capitalistic standpoint, as Adam Smith did, that they're actually benefiting society as a whole. They're doing it for all the wrong reasons. And God's looking on the heart. He says, why are you doing this? What is your motive? Let's take, for example, that local den of iniquity, the corner convenience store. You walk into the local convenience store, and what do you see when you walk in there? They're selling tobacco products, they're selling alcohol, they're selling lottery tickets, they might be selling gossip magazines. It used to be years ago they'd sell pornography, but now everybody can get that online. Now, does the owner of the store honestly think for even 1 minute that any of those things are good for people? Sometimes they're even required to post by law to post a sign outside that says, such and such a product contains nicotine, which is an addictive product. So if the owner of the store really thinks that these products aren't really good for people, why is he selling them? Just to make his money, off of other people. A while back during the height of the pandemic, we had a local grocery store around here. And I was over there one day, and they had a sign on the door that says, because we care for our customers, and our employees, we want everyone to wear a face mask. Okay, I get it. It's a highly contagious and potentially fatal disease, and so I can put a face mask on it. So I buy what I was going to buy, and I'm going to the checkout line, and the lady standing in front of me is buying a pack of cigarettes. Now, if you really genuinely care about the welfare of your customers, why are you selling them tobacco products? they're precisely the ones that were more at risk of COVID because they had compromised respiratory systems. They're the ones that are going to wind up in the ICU on a respirator. And so, and the reason why is because, man, if it's legal and we can make money over it, we're going to do it. And if we can get somebody addicted to it, and even though it ruins their health over a long period of time, if it bleeds their money, we can make a profit off it. And so therefore we're going to do that. Now, is that really Christian? Okay. Does that really conform to the will of our Creator God? No, it does not. Now, it is true that there is a certain sense in which I can understand why a lot of people, a lot of conservative Christians, really are concerned about the things that they see going on in society today. And I know I certainly have seen it firsthand myself. What we're really looking at is the collapse of Western civilization, and which is currently in an advanced state of decline. So we're seeing a breakdown in public morality. We're seeing the disintegration of the family structure. As a tax preparer, I've seen people come in and claim a couple of their grandchildren as dependents because the parents of the children are on drugs, and you just imagine what it must be like to be one of those kids. What about the young boys that grow up in these single-parent families where they have little or no contact with their biological fathers? And I think the statistics show that they're the ones that are most likely to suffer from depression and get involved in street violence. It's also true, too, that here in the U.S., because of some Supreme Court decisions, America is officially an atheistic country. What happened was that they're starting with the Everson versus the Board of Education back in 1947, and then again with the Regent's Prayer case in 1962. What happened was that the court wound up putting an atheist spin on the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. So what they wind up arguing is that the government may not do anything to show favoritism toward religion in general. And unfortunately, that puts the federal government and it puts the public education system in the position where they cannot acknowledge the existence of a supreme being. So then where does that leave the subject of public morality? You get into all these cases about the sanctity of life, abortion, the sanctity of marriage, gay marriage, that kind of a thing. And it was so sad to say that in the most recent abortion case, the Dobbs case, the Supreme Court, with an allegedly conservative supermajority, could not determine, when human life begins or what constitutes a human being. Instead, they just said, well, we'll leave it to the voters to decide through their state legislatures. That is how utterly morally bankrupt modern American society has become. And those are the conservative justices that were doing that. So the thing we want to keep in mind is this. God looks on the heart. He's concerned about the motives and the feelings and the emotions that we experience inside the heart that kind of govern human action. And in God's sight, no human being is truly righteous. And that's why you can't really say that the United States or any other country in the world is a Christian nation, you see, because in the sight of God, we're all sinners and we need salvation. And so we have to keep in mind that righteousness, true righteousness, is not just a mere external conformity to a set of social standards. I think we have a tendency to judge ourselves on the basis of, the public morality, the standards of surrounding society. So as long as I'm a decent, law-abiding citizen and I pay my taxes and, obey the laws and so on, faithful to my spouse, most of the time or whatever, then I think that I'm basically a righteous, upright person. And so and a lot of times atheists will bring this up because they'll complain about, the God of the Bible and why would he do this and that and the other thing, and destroy entire nations and so on. And they're basically operating on the assumptions that they're basically, righteous, upright people. When in the sight of God, they're not. There is no such thing as a righteous human being, aside from outside of, the righteousness of Christ being imputed to them. And so basically, it's a genuine desire in one's heart for God and for others that God is looking for. And how many human beings can honestly say, how many people, even if they go to church on Sunday, how many people can honestly say the reason why they're there is because of the tremendous love that they have for God himself, and they want to be in his presence, and they want to lift up their voices in praise and thanksgiving to him? How many of them are just going through it, just to please others? And so then the real question is not, is America a Christian nation? The real question is, where do we stand as individuals, as individual human beings before God? We need to look, each one of us needs to look inside his own heart and humble ourselves before God. And we need to come to Christ in repentance and faith so that we can receive the forgiveness of our sins. That is what true Christianity is. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope that you take all of that to heart, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you. Bye.